Permit.
Yeah.
That's the official
This- I-
starting
I was-
signal.
I That's really good. Thank y'all for being here this morning. This is a topic of great interest to me. When I was growing up in San Angelo, we had a synagogue in town, but they only had services rarely. And then when I was in fifth grade, a Jewish family moved to town, and their daughter was my age, and we were great friends. But they were so lonely and such faithful Jewish people that they moved. So I think of Janine a lot when I think of Holy Week, and when I think of the animating question for this class is, did the Jews kill Jesus? And if so, which Jews? And all of that, because I don't know if I don't know how many are aware of sort of the historical violence against Jews associated with Good Friday. Not some of us are, some of us not so much. Yeah. But that's been an issue for around 1,000 years. And I'll go over a little bit of the history. And I am not an expert in this topic, so I welcome those who may know a lot more to please put your 2 cents in. It's just something that's near and dear to my heart, and I try to look into it as I go along. And as we prepare for Holy Week, which starts next week with Palm Sunday, I just wanted us to think about this. I'm going to go ahead and hand out these readings. We'll look at these. These are gospel readings that are read in Holy Week, and we'll look at those in a minute. I did want to just tell you what 3 of my sources were really quick. For those of you who are readers, this is a wonderful little book. Jesus Wasn't Killed by the Jews, Reflections for Christians in Lent. And most of the authors in here are Christian of one stripe or another, Roman Catholic, Protestant. But a Jewish scholar, Amy Jill Levine, whom the women are reading in their weekly or bi-monthly book and Bible study, she wrote the concluding chapter, which is really beautiful in here. So at any rate, very, very easy, very readable. I'll be happy to share if y'all want to, if the ladies in that class want to see Amy Jill Levine's, kind of take on it, I'll be happy to share that with you. Another one of my sources we have at the seminary where Lisa is, a scholar of Jewish Christian relations, who's the history teacher, Dan Jocelyn Simitowski, and that's a Polish last name. And he wrote a really good article. I'm going to put a link to it in the tidings this week. Very readable. You can see all my notes all over it. Why Good Friday was dangerous for Jews in the Middle Ages and how that changed. Because it really began to change, of course, after the Holocaust, when we realized what the ultimate cost of sort of both casual and intentional anti-Judaism could lead to. And then this is a wonderful little New Testament called the Jewish Annotated New Testament. So if you're ever interested in, what do Jewish people think about our New Testament, and also on what our kind of traditional takes on, say, the Pharisees is, what do they have to say about that? This is a great resource. And again, Amy Jill Levine is one of the editors of this, I think, the ladies in that study. I'll just pass these around if you want to look. You don't want to see all the markups I've done on this article, but I'll share it with you in the tidings. And I want to say, I don't intend for this to in any way take away from the readings that we have in Holy Week, but it's simply just to bring to our awareness how some of these readings that we then don't think about outside of church have resulted in great harm to our Jewish brothers and sisters. And I do want to remind us all that Jesus was a very faithful and devout Jew his entire life. Paul was a faithful and devout Jew his entire life. We don't know about the Christian way of life until Acts is put together. So much later on, or it was just to say around 100 or 90 or so, when the Christian life is called the way. And so really the whole New Testament was written by people who, for the most part, remained very faithful Jews. And we follow a very faithful Jew who did not intend to start Christianity. And so we, Jews of today and Christians of today, came out of the same branch, right? We're all in this first century Judaism branch, which was very varied. In some ways, it's sort of like our Christian denominations now. There are all kinds of different groups and ideas and followers and whatnot. So that's one thing I think it's important to remember. And another is, I don't know how much y'all are aware of this, but I've been so aware of it in the last 6 months in the Austin area, acts of anti-Judaism. I don't know if y'all have seen them in the news, but these have just been really in the last 4 to 5 months. On November 21st, so right around Thanksgiving, at Congregation Beth Israel, someone intentionally set a fire there and did a great deal of smoke damage. And they had to they always have security, right? Because they're Jewish and they need it in some ways, but they had to hire extra security as they got the smoke out of the building because they had to leave so many of the doors open. A month before that, at Anderson High School, swastikas were painted around, but this was also in combination with what I would call other hate speech. So there were anti-Black slogans and anti-gay slogans on there also. And also in October, and y'all may remember this, on MOPAC, 12 people unrolled a banner that over MOPAC, and I don't remember what the bridge going over MOPAC was, but it said "Vax the Jews." And it was done right near a center of Austin Jewish Life, their community center. So, you know, even though we may not be anti-Jewish at all here, it swirls around outside of us, both in some Christian circles and just in some circles that are not Christian. So just something to be aware of. Okay, I think what we'll do, I want us to read some of these readings from, especially the Gospel of John is the gospel that really kind of gets us into trouble because throughout this gospel, John uses the phrase, the Jews, an awful lot. The other gospels will often then use pronouns like them or they. And so you have to go back and kind of figure, well, who is the they or them that John's talking about? But in John, it starts in a good way in the 4th chapter of John. This is not on your sheet, I don't think, but this is Jesus speaking. And I'm blanking on the context right now. Doug might can help me. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. So salvation is from the Jews. Jesus is from the Jews. The way is from the Jews. A very favorable use of that. And then it just sort of goes down from there. And John, in the Gospel of John, we realize that the Jews are looking for an opportunity to kill Jesus as early as chapter 7. So much earlier in Jesus' ministry than we might think about. Where does your reading start with John 18? Let's see, why don't we won't read all of these. Will you read 18:35? And then we'll just go around if you don't mind and just read a little bit. And you'll notice the phrase crucify him is in bold. And not everyone has one. I apologize. I had no idea so many people would be here. So those of us who have a copy, when it says, when the part's in bold, it's crucify him, if we'll all read that together, like we do in our readings in church when we're reading these. So go ahead and start with 18:35.
Pilate replied, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me.
After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, I find no case against him, but you have a custom that I relieve someone for you at Passover. Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? They shouted in reply, not this man, but
Barabbas.
Barabbas.
Yeah.
Now
We did have a-
Barabbas was a bandit.
And can we pause just right there? I mean, you see what's happening with this phrase, the Jews, not just them or they, but the Jews hand over Jesus. The Jews are clamoring not for Jesus' release, but for a bandit's release, right? Okay. Kenny.
So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted.
Crucify him, crucify him.
Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die because he has claimed to be the Son of God."
And can I pause right there? And you'll notice that in this case, it looks like the civil authority Pilate does not want to crucify Jesus, but the Jews do. Greg. John 19:12.
From then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews cried out,
If you release this man,
You are no friend of the emperor.
Now that's dangerous to be Pilate and not a friend of the emperor, and the emperor appointed Pilate to his position. Wilson, you want to read that Matthew for us?
All of them said,
Let
Let
him
him
be
be crucified.
then he asked, why, what evil has he done? But they shouted all the more,
Let him be crucified.
And I'll pause right there and say that in this case, see, notice how Matthew and the other gospels tend to say them rather than the Jews. And the them in this case refers to the Jewish crowds persuaded by their chief priests and elders. So like their bishops and priests, persuaded by their bishops and priests. Judy. Mark 15, if you're up for it.
They shouted back,
Crucify
him.
him.
Pilate asked them, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more.
Crucify him.
So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them. And after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified.
Thank you. And then the last reading is the one we'll hear this year. We're in the year where we're reading Luke.
But they, chief priests, leaders, and the people kept shouting,
Crucify him.
Crucify him.
but they kept urgently demanding with loud shouts that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed.
So it's after readings like these, and I don't know when this violence really started. But as a church, apparently we started using the John Gospel reading for Good Friday kind of as a standard in the 4th century. And so presumably it's around that time that maybe some of this violence could have started. But after Good Friday, it was not unusual after hearing all these things and feeling as though, and then there's another passage in Matthew, I think it is, where at least the narrator, if not Jesus, says, Jesus' blood will be on the hands of the Jews throughout all generations. So it's kind of explicitly there also. But people would go out with stones and certainly stone people in their homes. And it's not like, every Christian was gung ho for this, but it did wreak a lot of violence. And there were even instances where both the church and civil authorities did their best to protect Jews by setting up curfews where Jews were required to remain in their homes. And I found this one quite fascinating. A law that said no Christian under the age of 16 years could throw a stone. Now that's telling you that, like, what do families do this together? Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's just important for us to realize where this can go. And I myself, I don't know about y'all, But I know some really faithful, loving, wonderful Christians, but who've never done Bible study or EFM or Sunday Adult Ed, who have said to me, well, aren't the Jews, meaning the Jews of today and through the century, aren't the Jews responsible for killing Jesus? And, you know, not that those people wanted to go and hurt them, but they felt like they bore that guilt. So I think it's important that we know this. Do y'all have any questions or comments or wonderings so far? Dave?
I've not seen the Passion of Christ, but I think it's largely based on the Johannine
Oh,
Passion
interesting.
account. And I think I've heard that at some point, you've got this kind of blood crazed Jewish
Mhm.
crowd, but I think Satan suddenly appears in the midst of them, is what I've heard.
Oh, wow.
And,
Yeah.
so, that kind of thinking is still being perpetuated.
Yes, yeah, thank you. It is. And I think we're not as aware of it, but it's good to be aware. Yes.
I read where the Jerusalem was a back country province of Rome, did not have
Mhm.
much influence. And that Pilate had already gotten in trouble with Rome on a couple of previous occasions. So he was treading on very thin ice when all this was happening. He didn't want to do anything that would create further problems.
I think that's a great point. And another thing that I haven't said is that we're at the Jewish Passover. So hordes of pilgrims have come to Jerusalem, right, to worship. So there are crowds of people. And this is why Herod comes to Jerusalem. He's in residence at this time, is because he and Pilate are very concerned about keeping the peace, and not wanting the crowds to go nuts or lose control. And of course, the followers of Jesus are very passionate, and we'll read on Palm Sunday, all the people, as Herod's coming in, probably one gate in Jerusalem on a big steed with military trappings. Jesus is coming into Jerusalem through another gate on a donkey and with people throwing palm branches and saying Hosanna rather than, whatever greeting, which might have been Lord have mercy to Herod. So you have these real contrasts, and you're right. It was just sort of a hotbed ripe for, emotions and people to go wild and take off.
And Claire,
Yes.
there's another voice that's going on that is associated with Judas and the Zealots,
Thank you.
who
Mhm.
hate the Romans, and their whole job is to mess with Pilate and anything he has to offer. They want to kill Roman soldiers, whether they're good, bad, or different, even later Christian ones.
Mhm.
Later, after
Mhm.
years after the crucifixion, the Zealots kept going because they wanted to get Rome out. So Jerusalem was just as it is today, a hotbed of various voices, strident, and every single group thinks they're right.
Yes, because it's about God, right? So that's why they're so committed to it. That's really important. Thank you for God to include that. Thank you. That's important. And I think that's important to keep in mind as we hear today's gospel reading where Judas is mentioned, not in that context, but he's called a thief parenthetically by John, and as someone who robbed the common purse, didn't really care about the poor, but wanted to take the money just so he could do something for himself. But I will say one other view of Judas that I kind of find intriguing, and y'all can let me know what you think about this, is that Judas, and in some readings, wanted to force Jesus' hand to really go all out for the poor, for being anti-Herod, anti-Pilate, and to really institute right now the kingdom in human governmental terms, the kingdom on earth with humans running it. So, so Judas maybe wasn't 100% bad and not necessarily the devil that he might be portrayed as in some movies. And perhaps this is why he felt so horrible. He went and killed himself, you know? We don't know. Yes.
Was Pilate a Jew?
Was Pilate a Jew? Pilate was not a Jew. That's a great question. He was not a Jew. He was a Roman procurator. So some sort of Roman official assigned by the emperor to keep peace out there. Now, King Herod was a Jew or a kind of Jew. It depends on who's looking at Herod, right? Depends on what he would claim himself as a Jew, but not every Jewish group would say he was a true Jew. And he was certainly working in collaboration with Rome and wouldn't have ruled without Rome's okay and stamp of approval. It's really interesting about Herod. Steve and I went to Israel right before COVID hit, and I'd never really wanted to go, but I knew this opportunity came up, and it was amazing. I'm so glad I did. But one of the things we saw there, Herod had great building projects. And one of his great building projects was right outside Jerusalem. Jerusalem itself and the temple are on the mount, like a really high plateau. So you could see the temple, which was enormously tall. You could see it from all around. Well, Herod kind of wanted to compete with that. And so he built this thing called the Herodium. And I can't remember exactly what that was used for. Other than his pleasure, had beautiful gardens and spent all kinds of money on it. And now when you go, it's just a hill of dust. It's only been unearthed, and they only realized it was there, say, in the last 30 or so years. Otherwise, Herod, who thought this would be one of his lasting things, it's just a hill of dust. So it's quite fascinating, but from the Temple Mount, you probably wouldn't have been able to see it back in Jesus' day. So it looked really impressive. Any other questions or comments right now? One of the things when this violence really began to take a turn in the 20th century, as I say, after the Holocaust, when we all sort of woke up to what can casual, uninformed, much less intentionally malicious anti-Judaism look like. The church itself went through an unrelated movement to World War II, I think, but called liturgical renewal, the renewal movement. We recovered so many ancient texts and had done so much study. And at any rate, to make a long story short, and it wasn't just the Catholic Church that underwent this renewal. It was pretty much a lot of Protestant churches, certainly the Episcopal Church underwent it in a deep way in the Catholic Church. And if you remember, Vatican II was a big thing, right? It was a 3-year council, and many, many wonderful lasting things came out of Vatican II. And one of those is this document, all their documents are in Latin, called Nostra Aetate, which I think means in our time. And it's a document that talks about, well, what should Christian or / Catholic relations with non-Christians be like? And in there, they specifically spelled out, Jews should not be held responsible for the death of Jesus. And it decries hatred, persecutions, displays of anti-Semitism directed against Jews at any time and by anyone. So that was a document that has had wide and lasting impact in breaking us of this uninformed bad habit. One thing I want to say about the Jews, this may be the last thing I say, is when we read these readings liturgically as we do, and we all say, crucify him, the point is we are these Jews, right, who are saying this. And it's not to say we all killed Jesus, but it's to say we all in our own ways get caught up in things that turn us from Jesus and turn us from a faithful Christian past. And that's why it's been our practice for I don't know how long for us all to say together, crucify him, crucify him. Like did you grow up Episcopalian or others in here? And did y'all say this
I
part?
grew up in the real.
Oh, okay. And I tried to find the 28 prayer book online and what they did with this, and I couldn't find it. I need to do
It's
more.
not in there.
That's what I thought. It's not in there. So they didn't do anything on Good Friday,
We did, but.
but Passion Sunday. is also.
It was, what we do now was the basis, but it was very strict down and not much congregation.
Interaction. Okay.
It was pretty strict.
That makes sense. And especially in the wake of liturgical renewal in the 40s, 50s, and as that unfolded, the congregation gets involved. And Lisa's probably had an entire class in this.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Last semester, I had a New Testament class in the final days, and we were studying the book of John in this specific passage. And as a class, where it said they or the Jews, we as a class changed the wording, where it might read the people or the crowds, as to take away the emphasis on the word Jews,
Yeah.
trying to make it less anti-Semitic.
And how did it sound to everyone?
It made a difference because it wasn't so in your face, Jews killing Jesus, which is what Dr. Dan is trying to avoid.
Yeah. And Dan, the history professor at the seminary, the scholar of Jewish Christian relations, which was challenged by a rabbi colleague to be part of the solution to this challenge of the repeated phrase of the Jews, because in a Good Friday liturgy, this is the only gospel we're given to read. You know, it's not like we switch to Mark or Matthew or Luke. I mean, it's always the Gospel of John. And so Dan, with a focus group at St. David's and with Jane Patterson, has put together an alternate translation that often has the word Judeans in there instead of the Jews, because it's recognizing that, again, with all these groups, you know, the Galileans and the Galileans are in the north, the Jewish people in the north, and the Judeans are the Jewish people in the south, and kind of playing off some of the conflict there. But we're not going to go forth from a Good Friday service hearing the Judeans and, you know, then seeing our Jewish neighbor and thinking, gosh, you know, what did we just read? Yes.
Wasn't that, and I may be wrong on this, but wasn't that part of Hitler's propaganda to stir up that feeling that the Jews were the Jesus killers? And that was part of his,
without a doubt.
yeah, part of his justification in killing the Jews and in wiping them out, but by making them to be the Jesus killers so that the whole Christian world would be against them.
And see, I think that's right. And that's like how so many people lost their way, right? I mean, so many Christians,
Right.
I'm saying, lost their way.
So I keep hearing this about regionalism.
Mhm,
And, you know, we have a north versus south issue.
mhm.
In Israel, there are those who said, can anything good come out of Nazareth? I mean, it's
Thank you for that.
desert.
Yes.
Why would you, who could come out of there?
And that's from the Gospel of John, right? Yeah. Mhm.
Also, when, just to add to your interest level, John is writing his gospel in Greek. There's Hellenic, Attic, and Doric dialects of Greek. The New Testament's written in Koine, street language. But John, a fisherman, writes Hellenic, Attic, and Doric dialects.
Oh, I didn't know that about his Greek.
So where does John get that? What were his early years? Where did he learn
Mhm.
that kind of language if he's fishing all the time? And so, you know, we don't know about the first 30 years of Jesus' life, but I think John was his friend. I'm just very interested in did the fishermen acquire that knowledge?
And how did Jesus, a carpenter in Nazareth, acquire his profound knowledge also?
So, there are lots of books that suggest alternatives about why they knew so much, but there was some kind of formal education that went on for Jesus and John in particular. Somehow they acquired some of that. Very near Nazareth is a little town called Sepphoris. And it was the gem of the area. The streets are made of polished marble, and they're so worn down with the chariots that you can see the real marks. You'll also see that there are these big blocks, and those are speed bumps for the teenagers who were driving their chariots too fast and killing pedestrians. And so, not a lot changes. But Sepphoris had an amphitheater, and Jesus uses this weird similitude or metaphor about hypocrites. There's no Jewish Aramaic word for hypocrite, but the hypocrites at the theaters were the choruses, and they wore these big heads, and they had holes in the head where their speaking parts would come out, like crucify him, or whatever the theme of the play was. But often the chorus would be saying things that the mask didn't represent. And so the hypocrites became
That's so
those who
interesting.
spoke one thing and did another. And Jesus, I think, because of his father being a carpenter, probably went to Sepphoris, because carpenters, if you've been to Jerusalem and Holy Land, you know there's not a lot of wood. There's a lot of rock. So architectons or carpenters carved stone. So maybe Joseph worked at Sepphoris and took Jesus, and Jesus saw a hypocrite in action. I don't know. I'm just saying it's interesting
Very.
because Jesus is human, and he had human experiences, and he brought in other cultural things when he was telling his own faithful people, there's more. And my last thing I'll say is the Sea of Galilee, it's very wonderful, and I've been there. I wanted to show my congregation that I was human, so I brought some rocks from the bottom of the Sea of Galilee back home and put them on the pulpit. And I said, I didn't walk on the water, but I at the bottom and tried to sink the box.
That's good.
If
Thank
you've ever
you.
been to the Church of the Good,
Oh, is that
St. Luke's on the Lake,
Yeah.
that was designed by a geologist that was a Christian, and that lake happens to be a lot like
Yeah.
your lake.
Yeah,
So that-
so the Romans called it a lake, and Jews called it the Sea of Galilee. The Romans were trying to say, you guys need to get out more.
Yes, John.
Being a carpenter in these times made Jesus middle class.
I don't think there was a middle class back then. That's my understanding, is that there was, I've always heard it's like a pyramid. There are these few powerful, wealthy people at the top, and sort of everyone, and there are gradations of different people down at the bottom, but
My point being is that Jesus would have been exposed to education.
well, clearly he was, yes. Yes, clearly they valued it. And in at St. Anne's Church in Jerusalem, there's a wonderful statue that I think speaks to this. of Anne, the mother of Mary, Jesus' mother. And Anne is teaching Mary how to read. She's reading to her. And, you know, you can just sort of see that love of learning that gets passed down and that value. Yeah. Wilson?
I had a wonderful professional experience in 1998. I left the Texas State Auditor's Office and went to work for the Governmental Accounting Standards Board in Connecticut. We set all the standards that state and local governments had to follow in the country for their financial reporting. But there was a grant that I was the project manager for, funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and they're one of the great research funders in the United States. And it was interesting because most of the people at the Sloan Foundation were Jewish. And so we had a partner at the Fund for the City of New York, which was to provide technical services to people in New York on how to run government programs, and a wonderful lady named Barbara Poon. And Barbara was about 5'2", not much taller than that. She was the greatest Jewish mother that you could ever hope to have. I mean, she was the Jewish mother that and she decided that this kid from Wyoming and Texas was going to need all the help in the world in New York City. And she took me under her wing and taught me about Jewish holidays in the fall. And I lived in a town called Fairfield. It was a wonderful city. On one side of the road that divided Fairfield from Bridgeport, Connecticut, was Sacred Heart University. On the other side of the road was the Greek Orthodox Temple. And there were 5 synagogues, a quarter of a mile. And you learned that in October, on High Holy Days, that you needed to leave for work really early because all the Jewish people were walking. And so I asked Barbara, I said, well, what are the little bags that all the ladies are carrying? And of course, dummy me, they were carrying their shoes. So when they got to temple, they could take their tennis shoes off. It was the greatest education in the world. And respect for, and I learned so much just because of that interaction. And thank God for my Jewish mother, because you didn't schedule things on Friday afternoon. You just didn't. You weren't going to have anybody come to meetings. So it was a wonderful education.
That's great. That's great. Amen. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Very interesting. So the Jews did kill Christ.
Some of them did, but the Romans are really. I should have said that. It's a Roman execution. Yeah, it's not a Jewish execution.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
6 weeks ago.